the recording, feel free to turn your camera off. But otherwise, we're just recording this so that those who wanted to attend and couldn't, there'll be a record of it, and we can share this afterwards. Hope that's okay with everyone. I'll give everyone another minute to join, and then we'll get going. Oh, and while you're waiting, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, what you do, why you're here, what you're interested in understanding. Okay, I think we'll get started. Um, just to introduce myself, I'm Lewis. I'm a head of practice at Collaborate, and then I've got my colleagues Emma, who is waving now, and Naomi with me, and they will also be presenting alongside me for this session. This is the second of our Test and Learn Autumn series, and so the first one was last week, where we were focusing on building models to interpret complexity. And then this session is focused on building learning infrastructure. So how do you actually build the infrastructure that enables you to learn together? There are two other sessions happening later on. We'll give those details a bit later on. But these are just to highlight Collaborate's practice and what we do and how we can support people, and how we've done it in different ways, and give everyone a sort of understanding of what that looks like. So to start with, this is for those of you who did attend the last session, this will be a similar set of slides. This is just a sort of our pitch of why we think learning is important, why it's necessary. So I'm just going to go through that, and then I'll be passing over to Naomi to start the main content of the session. So if you can have the next slide, Emma. So yeah, why test and learn? Can I have the next one? Sorry. Um, we work in complexity. The systems in which we are working in, the lives that people have that we are trying to support are complex. There are many different actors, many different factors that impact or affect people's lives. And so, because of all of these things, we have to recognize that we are part of a complex network and web of services and people and systems. But that means that rather than having a sort of a straightforward solution to a problem, we need to understand what's going on around things and understand the complexity that people's lives may face, and recognize that actually, even if people are being supported by services or things like that, that's only one part of their lives. Their lives are far more complex, and in turn, the network of provision, the way we organize our services in this country are also complex. And so we need to take a learning approach in order to try and better understand how the interactions and how that affects the way we work. Okay, next slide, please. And so we need to recognize that change is emergent and unpredictable when working in complexity. We can't just say if we do this action, an outcome will happen. And I know that a lot of our part of the human learning systems, which is something Collaborate has worked on a lot, is saying that a lot of our work, a lot of the way we have our services and support is provided in this country suggests that if we just provide someone a service, they will receive a positive outcome. But actually, we know that's not the case, and that change needs to be recognized as an emergent thing rather than a definitive thing. Um, We also know that people's lives are unique and the context around them is ever changing. And so we need to be able to adapt to people's lives and the reality of people's lives. Sometimes those contexts change very quickly, sometimes they change more slowly. It's probably fair to say that the last 5 years or so have been quite a rapid context change. You think about things like the pandemic and then the subsequent cost of living crisis, um, energy bills and things like that. Those contexts have changed very quickly, and but we need to be aware of those things. Need to be aware of the factors in which people's lives are lived, in order to be able to best respond to what people's needs. And because of that, it's quite hard to actually identify what works. We can't suggest that one service that was really helpful for this person might be helpful for another person, because actually their context, their situation, their experiences might be inherently different. So what we're trying to do is identify patterns and opportunities rather than suggest that this is the way to solve this for somebody, because actually that is so person specific that it's impossible to say that what worked for one person will definitely work for someone else. And so that's why we need to take test and learn as a strategy, because we need to recognize that we need to continuously learn about the people who we're working with, the people we're supporting, in order to deliver services that provide them the support, and in turn change systems so that people's lives are improved collectively. Next slide. And so then just the last bit on what do we mean by learning? Um, when we talk about learning, and there's lots of different ways to interpret it, but we think of it more than just the acquisition of knowledge. We think of learning as an ongoing and active process that involves implying insight to inform what you do and how you do it. And I quite like using this sort of three-stage process. There is lots of information that we can get, and that could be whether that's data coming from a service, whether that's information you've gathered from talking to people, whether that's population data or other things. All of that is just information. You then transform that into insight, find the key points that's telling you, the sort of differences that you need to understand, or the interesting points that come from that information. But that until you then actually do something about it, you're not really learning. And there's a lot of the way that public services are set up in this country is to do a lot of insight generation, and our whole focus is on how can we produce more and more insight, and very little on how do we actually implement that insight and actually change what we're doing. And so our focus is really clear that you need to, when you're designing these processes, design also for how you're going to learn based on this insight that you've provided. How are you actually going to change what you're doing, adapt your approaches based on that, rather than just generating insight, but actually doing the same thing that's been done before. And so learning only really happens, as far as we're concerned, when you're able to actually do that implementation and use that as a continual process of reflection and adaptation, to ensure you're delivering what is needed. So yeah, we just to give you an update on the where we are. This is our second one. So this is the building learning infrastructure, and then we've got a 3 or 4 week gap. We'll send out an email with all the details for everyone who doesn't have them. And then we're going to do a session on gathering the data and how you gather good data. And then lastly, we'll do a session on how you actually do that learning interaction cycle. But today we're focusing on learning infrastructure. And I think I'm handing over to Naomi now to start that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. And I guess just to start by saying that when we talk about test and learn, we take a broad approach to that. We're not talking about one kind of specific methodology. We're talking about a kind of a very broad interpretation where we're doing this sort of constant cycle of what's going on, what are we observing, what are we understanding about our project, our organization, our system, whatever level. what might we want to change and improve, trying things out, learning from that, and then and making changes. And that can those kind of test and learn cycles can be as short as a day and as long as 5 years. There's no kind of specific timeline for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what do we mean by test and learn infrastructure. So on this slide, you can see that we're kind of thinking about this as three sort of interacting features or building blocks. So mechanics, skills, and culture. And what do we mean by those? Well, the mechanics of the test and learn process is really the sort of the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how of learning, how we organize ourselves to learn. And it's what gives the test and learn process its structure and its momentum. And this will include kind of designing around the context and the specific situation. So understanding and adapting to the rhythms and flows of the work, finding the right rhythm for the work that you're trying to kind of learn in and from. And so that really relates to this idea of timescales. Do you need to reflect and learn every day, or do you need to do it every month or 3 months? What's the rhythm for collecting data and reflecting on it? Then there's the kind of the learning spaces, if you like. So who's coming together in what combinations, in what types of spaces to learn together. And we have a strong belief in social learning or peer learning, that you can do some learning and reflective practice on your own, but really a lot of good learning happens collectively. So how often are you coming together, and how are you coming together to learn? And then there's sort of how you're stewarding learning through a system. So the kind of flows of learning, horizontally and vertically, if you like. So with your peers and across a service or a project, but then also up and down the system. Right up to kind of senior decision makers, but also right to the grassroots. And then there's the way that you, and we talked about this last time, you use models and frameworks to guide the learning process and make sense of the data. And then how you are documenting and refining and sharing insights. And finally, how you're doing the kind of the adaptation, the iteration. So there's lots of sort of organization of the learning process. Emma's going to give you some sort of case examples of what that looks like in practice soon. Then there are skills. There's a whole kind of bunch of skills that are important for engaging in a test and learn process that can be nurtured, can be brought through a learning partner, can be developed. And that, includes reflective capacity, things like journaling, and just kind of being able to notice what we're doing and understand it. Sense making, which is a collective process. Discernment, judgment, critical thinking, listening, questioning, diagnostic skills, the ability to create psychological safety and inclusive learning spaces. So lots of different skills that we need. And then culture, and I'm going to unpack culture a bit. If you can go on to the next slide, Emma. Because I think, we all kind of use culture in slightly different ways, but in this slide, I'm borrowing from Edgar Schein's model of culture, in which there are sort of 3 levels, or 3, again, sort of characteristics that make up culture. At the top, we've got the visible, the things that we do and that we can see in an organization or a system. And so in terms of learning, these are the sort of behaviors, the rituals that we have in place. And this might mean, as simple as kind of we ask questions, we do check-ins, we listen reflectively, we coach, things that are easy to recognize. And then in the second level, we've got the espoused intentions around learning, the commitments, the things that we say about learning. So we might see these in policies and strategies, in kind of role descriptions, in a learning contract for a learning community. Underneath is the visible, the invisible stuff, but stuff that we still need to pay attention to, because you can bring in kind of new behaviors or rituals, but if beliefs don't change, they might not be effective. And these are the sort of underlying assumptions that people have around kind of test and learn. And, are they coming in cynical, or are they coming in with a belief that change can happen? Do they feel safe to talk about failure? Is it a very performative culture, and where people actually believe that it's more important to kind of do and say the right thing than to be honest? Is it a very authoritarian or hierarchical culture where people don't believe that they can change anything? So all of these underlying beliefs and assumptions are part of kind of what creates a learning culture, and trying to understand those and shift them is part of kind of creating a successful test and learn infrastructure. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to Emma, who's going to talk you through some specific examples of how we've worked on these things and supported organizations to develop these kind of different aspects of test and learn infrastructure in different contexts.
Great, thanks, Naomi. So I'm going to start with a project that we actually just are coming close to finishing in Devon, as an example of how we've helped to build learning cultures. So in Devon, we've been working as a learning and evaluation partner to 4 different test and learn projects that deliver support for people with complex needs in the kind of domestic abuse and substance misuse space. Early on in the project, we heard that the test and learn projects really wanted to make sure their learning went somewhere. So they were getting this funding to do all of this kind of testing out of what worked and what didn't work. And they wanted to make sure that it didn't just end with them. So for that reason, alongside doing the kind of actual learning and evaluation partner work, we wanted to focus a lot of our time as well on developing a better learning culture in Devon. So to do that, we facilitated several system-wide learning events, ensuring that the learning coming out of the test and learn projects could be shared widely. So we invited all different types of people to those events, from different providers, commissioners, people from adult social care, people from children's services. We really tried to, extend the invite far and wide. And we designed those events as a space for people to build relationships across the system, really hear about the different types of work going on. So not just what was going on in the test and learn projects, but other work in the Devon system, trying to get people to kind of see where issues they were facing aligned, ask questions of each other's work, and reflect on what people's different experiences of working in this space in Devon means for them, and what learning they could take and what types of things they could test given the information that was shared. So I think through those events, we saw a shift over time in people's behaviors. We felt like people started to ask more and more questions, really trying to understand from the projects why something had or hadn't worked. We also feel like people started to see themselves not just as employees of an organization, but as an actor in the wider system with the agency to influence it. So, building relationships and agreeing like, well, maybe we can work together on that. Or I see that like this is something I'm dealing with and that you're dealing with. Is there, can we find time to come together and talk about it? We also feel like people started to be more open to receiving kind of constructive criticism, recognizing that honesty is really key to learning. And, sometimes it's okay to admit that your organization or your way of working is maybe not the most enabling. So what is it that you can take from another organization and kind of embed in your own practice? And finally, we really try to encourage people to become more curious and willing to experiment. So in all of the events, we ask people to kind of make a commitment at the end to testing something out, whether that be really small. So, asking for feedback more, being more brave in the kind of information they wanted to share with partners, or, even adopting more open question styles on telephone calls. So I think we're really happy that we focus so much of our efforts on delivering those system-wide learning events, because we feel like they've been really crucial to people building and developing a better learning culture in Devon, and realizing that, they have lots to learn from each other as well as within their own organizations. And so by creating the space for stakeholders to come together, build relationships, practice learning, and feel connected to a larger purpose of systems change in that kind of space in Devon, I think we really have worked together to develop a strong learning culture there. Going to move on to an example on building learning skills. So I think, as mentioned in the last session, at Collaborate, we're part of the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership. So that partnership is funded by Sport England to evaluate their place-based approach to decreasing levels of physical inactivity in lots of places around England. So Sport England kind of fund these place partnerships around the country who are trying to decrease physical inactivity in their areas. And we kind of help those places evaluate and learn from their approaches to kind of improve them in the future. So at the beginning, Sport England was only funding around 12 places. That's now closer to 80, but in this example, I'm going to focus on the time when they were just funding around 12. So we realized as we were doing that work that, these 12 place partnerships weren't coming together really to reflect on how they were finding the work, despite the fact that they were doing very similar things. And so we thought that they would really value from kind of a structured space to come together and think about what's going well, what wasn't going so well, what they might need help with. And so we decided to set up some peer learning spaces so that different people from the different place partnerships could come together and discuss what they were finding tricky in a space that wasn't necessarily attended by their funder, Sport England. And we hoped that these kind of spaces would not only provide like the kind of mental space to come together and learn, but also it would help them practice some of those reflection and sense-making skills that are so key to learning. So by providing this, as you can see here, like this is what we shared with the place partnerships. We said that we would kind of set up the meetings for them. We'd kind of facilitate the first few, and then we'd see how they went. And so I think by providing this infrastructure, we help people get into the habit of coming together to discuss what issues they were struggling with, problem solving issues together, and then going away to apply, the kind of things they'd come up with in the sessions, and then coming back together to reflect on how it had gone. And I think having that space to kind of work through that process meant that they were able to develop stronger kind of reflection and sense-making skills, which are so critical to learning. But I think it's through the actual setup of the spaces and the kind of guiding them through that process that gave them the kind of fertile ground to develop those skills. So yeah, I think that's a good example of the ways in which you have to think about skill building when you're developing infrastructure for learning. And then the last example I wanted to touch on is more about the ways we've build like learning processes in places. So in this project, we supported Withybush Hospital, which is in Pembrokeshire in Wales, to improve their learning processes. So when we joined the work, we found that many people in the hospital had already really embraced a learning culture and really started to develop strong learning skills, but they were finding it difficult to know what to do with that learning, or to kind of move it around the hospital to make sure that it was heard by the people that needed to hear it, to kind of start making changes based on the insight they gathered. So we helped them build some of those necessary like processes or mechanics that Naomi was just speaking about. So we started work with one of the learning groups they had set up called the Whole System Learning Group, and that was composed of people from all around Withybush Hospital. In each session, a couple of group members would share a case study or an experience of delivering care, and then the group would consider what they could learn from that case. We kind of observed one or two of these sessions and noticed that while this format was really helpful in producing insight, it didn't really help the group surface what they were going to do with it or who they thought it was relevant for, or even, you know, as you can probably imagine, people working in hospitals don't necessarily have the time to come together in the time when it's topical. So they were finding it difficult to kind of come together and apply learning when it would be most useful to them. So after observing that, we suggested to the group that they start using a what, so what, now what structure, and that they kind of run the sessions like that so they can make most effective use of their time and really focus in on not just what happened, in the case, but what they felt was most important from it. So the types of things that they wanted to take away with them and apply later. So by kind of setting up that case study, it was like we were helping them to make most effective use of their time, and it would kind of allow the group to record how they wanted to act on their learning, who it should be shared with, and what follow-up actions needed to happen if they didn't feel like they could, if they wanted to come back to it later, if they didn't feel like they had time to look at it then. We also talked to them a lot about how often these sessions should happen, like take place, where else in the hospital these groups might be helpful, to have, how often senior leadership should join the sessions to kind of hear the learning that was coming out of the group. And I think in kind of giving them this structure and also thinking about how this group fit in with the wider hospital, we really helped them think through, okay, it's great that you've got a space for learning, but how are we making sure that this learning is not just staying within the group, but going side to side and up and down in the hospital, and including the people that it needs to include at a time that feels like accessible for these people to be engaging in learning. So, if you've got this structured, you've been able to write down what it is that you want to take forward. You've got it written down so you can take it forward at a time that feels appropriate to you, not necessarily just let it sit in the group. So I think in turn, by observing the practices of the group, identifying the need for a more structured process across the entire hospital, and supporting the group to kind of practice the skills needed to move beyond just surfacing insights, we were able to really help improve the learning process of the group and the kind of mechanics of the learning system going on in Withybush Hospital. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. Does anyone have any questions? I appreciate I probably ran through that, but I was a bit worried about the 3 examples of us not having time.
Do you want to pop the slides down, Emma?
Yeah.
And thanks for running through those. We'd be really interested to hear from folks. Does this resonate? Are you doing similar things? Are you grappling with kind of some of these, how to create better learning cultures, how to build skills, how to build kind of rhythms and so on in your situation, as well as just, did you have any kind of comments or questions on those examples? Harriet's got a question. Do you want to speak your question, Harriet?
Hi everyone, yes, Harriet Fisher, Chief of Staff at South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. So my question was around the senior leadership engagement. You mentioned that you considered kind of how often to bring in senior leaders into those moments. And my question, I guess, how often and how well did they engage? And did they get it? And did they bring any, I suppose, to elaborate on the question, did you need to do anything differently, or did they have any different perspectives that made you change your approach?
Yeah, so I think, well, I'll start off by saying all the senior leaders, I think, were really engaged. Like, they were all on board with kind of implementing more of a learning culture, and they were really keen to hear from kind of people at the front line of the hospital that were doing the work day in, day out. I think that sometimes the difficulties with these processes is making sure that people feel, it speaks to that learning culture, feel safe. You know, those spaces were really about people saying, well, this is an experience I've had at a hospital of providing care. It might not have gone, you know, this is what went well, this is not went well. This is how I'd like to improve next time, or this is what I think we can improve as a team next time. So I think it felt important to us to make sure that, you know, senior leaders weren't attending every single session, as we thought it might disrupt the kind of trusting culture that they had in the group. But at the same time, them themselves felt really strongly about bringing senior leaders into those sessions periodically so that they could see how valuable it was for them, and that, you know, even though it was a chunk of their time that they were spending on learning, that it was improving their practice at the hospital. So we kind of worked with them to decide how often they should attend. In the end, we kind of agreed on almost like a quarterly attendance, so it would, you know, they could come and experience the group and think about what the learning meant for them in that session, but also so that they weren't there all the time, kind of taking over the purpose of the group, I guess. When they did attend, because we ran a session with the senior leaders to kind of guide them through what it might look like when they attend, and they did engage really well. I think the kind of what so what now what process they let the group run, and then at the end they kind of just shared reflections on what they thought the cases meant for them, you know, at their level. You know, I remember we had an example about kind of end of life care, and the kind of learning from that was that it's difficult sometimes for the nurses to feel like empowered to take the decision of, I think this person just wants to be at home, or this person, you know, needs to stay in the hospital. And then senior leaders took from that, okay, is there something that we can be doing for the nurses to make sure that they feel like they are in the right, as the person working closest with the patient, to say like when they should go home, or when they should stay in the hospital. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Lewis, do you want to add anything around the kind of, oh, Harriet, did you want to come back in?
No, I was just going to say yes, thank you for answering my question.
Lewis, I don't know if you've got any anything to add more generally around this kind of interaction between kind of the sort of practitioner level learning and the kind of system level learning.
Yeah, I think the thing I try and think about is like that information can look different to different people, and I think there's a real task of really trying to understand what each person needs, or what each level of a system needs from data, or you know, insight that you've got, and what their perspective is. A lot of and I think we'll come into this a bit more in the next session around data gathering and in insight to action as well. Like bringing different perspectives in is crucial, but different perspectives are there because people have different views of what's going on, and so the key task is really understanding what are the drivers behind senior level parts of the system, what is driving their behavior, what's driving practitioner behavior, and getting a good understanding of that, because then you know how data might need to be presented or transformed or look differently or applied differently at each level. And I think that's the real key, is knowing that, so that you can take data between different levels of the system, support different levels of learning across it, and know what people need. I think in that example, like being sensitive to when is the right time to have the senior leaders in the room and when is not the right time is crucial for building trust, for making sure people sort of trust you in the process of guiding them through learning. So yeah, I all of this involves a lot of work to understand where people are coming from, and I think that's my main reflection on that point.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. As you can probably hear, we're really sort of interested and exercised at Collaborate, and this kind of question of how does learning flow through a system, and how do you, as Emma put it, move learning around, and is able to kind of influence the right bit of the work. So I'm sure some of you've got either examples of sort of where that's worked or where that hasn't worked. So anybody want to share something that you've been experimenting with or grappling with? Not yet. That's fine. Yeah, Jenny, go for it.
Well, so I'm supporting a system, so it's like a local authority, the ICB is involved, and a kind of voluntary umbrella organisation to evaluate their, I suppose, their community development work, the community engagement work, and in policy, they've like absolutely embraced this kind of learning culture and that kind of thing. And I think this is potentially my biases and my, I don't know, I'm going to use the word confidence, but I don't mean confidence kind of in this evaluation space. I'm probably still establishing myself, nowhere near kind of established as much as you guys are. And I think I'd be, or I know that I'd be like really worried about presenting something like brilliant and widely used, like that Rolf model, like to these people, because I feel that I get the feeling they're always looking for a really complex evaluation methodology or reflection kind of like framework and that kind of thing. And yeah, it just, so I suppose what I'm asking is like, what, I always ask for advice. I'm sorry, I did last week too, but kind of advice to kind of help me champion these kind of like easy to use and pick up models for reflection and learning, that kind of thing. If that makes sense, I hope it did.
Lewis, do you want to? I was just thinking about making it happen, actually, as which we talked a little bit about kind of last week in terms of a model. But
so I think the way that we try and engage people in this is by really trying to come at where they're coming from. It. I mean, I've worked as an evaluator for years, and every time you speak to someone who you've sent out these feedback forms or tools or whatever, and they just feel separate to their role. Most evaluation is decided top down. Here's a program, and here's what we need to understand about the program, not how are the people delivering this on the ground and how are they working and what information do they value, find useful. And so that means when in a top-down thing, you provide them an outcome tool to do, they invariably don't do it, don't do it in the same way you want them to do, or various other things, because actually their main role is supporting people, not filling out evaluation tools, and they're always busy, so they're just not going to prioritize it. And that basically my while there's other challenges, it leads to poor data. It leads to data that's either inaccurate or accurate, but it looks accurate, but you don't know it's inaccurate because they made and my partner delivers frontline services, and she regularly claims that, well, if someone's telling me that we have to deliver fill in these outcomes tools, we just make up the numbers because no one knows, and we're too busy focused on, she works in homelessness, rehoming people to fill in an outcome stuff. That is the reality, and there's lots of Toby Lowe, who we collaborate with, has done work on like the gamification of those kind of things. So I'll get to my point. So, but
What's interesting, keep going.
what we did in this Making It Happen project is really, instead of doing that top-down approach, we just went and worked with the community development workers and the communities who are part of this program, and said, show us how you do your job, show us what your work looks like. And we did a bit of that, did a little bit of observation, went to some of their team meetings, looked at the tools and stuff they already had, and then went, okay, here are some points where we can take some data, and here are some points where maybe can we add a bit to it? Can we, can you ask a few more questions here, or can you add a little bit here? And like find some common ground. And so then what we did was, we'd had some plates where they were just already doing it, and they just maybe did it in a slightly different format that we could use, or we said, okay, if you ask a few more questions here, and that was really good, because then they were able to and also we did some case studies stories, which was where they said they basically highlighted what they thought were the good outcomes. And clearly we needed to do some triangulation of those and things like that. But what it meant was people were really engaged with it, because they saw not only they felt it did fitter with their job, the evaluation aligned with what they were trying to do, what they were working towards, it also enabled them to talk about what they were doing and what they felt was beneficial, which meant the data that we got in and the quality of the data, and then the ability to go back to someone and talk about it, like, oh yeah, I remember that, and filling it all out was so much better that then we had all this rich amount of data. We got such good quality data back. It did require a bit more processing from us. I think that's the challenge. You're moving the burden of resource from the front line to the evaluator, and I know that's tricky, but that meant everyone was more engaged with it, and it also meant that when you had a commissioner come in and start talking about it and what it meant, you had an army of the community development workers backing you up as well, going, no, this is accurate because this is what we're seeing, this represents our work. And so that's our approach, is really trying to, like, it's actually less of a technical one and more just how people work. If what you're asking them to do is not relevant to, or doesn't feel relevant to their job, they will not do it as well as you would like. So you've got to make it as relevant to their job and involve them as much in that process as possible, to get that. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
It does, and actually it's so reassuring, thank you. In a couple of weeks, I've got a meeting with the community development workers, so the people working on the ground, to figure out what they already collect, like kind of what you're saying, and how kind of amenable or how easy can we make it for them to collect stuff that I suppose the programme structure needs for the evaluation, or thinks it needs for the evaluation, obviously. But no, that's good, thank you.
And the one last thing I'd add to that is, like, find ways that are as easy for them to get the data down as possible. As soon
Okay.
as you present them a tool where they've got to start rating things or whatever, it's too much brain work for them to do because they're focused on the other things, and they've got to do all this interpretation going, is this a 4 or is
Yeah.
it a 5? Whereas if they can tell you in their language, in whatever way or in whatever way, this is what has happened and this is what's occurred, and that they're more likely to do that, because then they're doing it in there. As soon as you put up a barrier of they've got to add an interpretive lens, it just stops making sense, and it stops being prioritized.
It's brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Lewis. It's super interesting, this idea that, because you're working in complexity, everything has to be complex. And actually, I think, a lot of the time we find that getting to the simplest question that you can ask is the way to go. Emma, I was wondering if you want to just comment on the sort of, what was the reaction to kind of bringing this very simple kind of what, so what, now what model? Was there any resistance, or?
No, I don't think so. I think I think what's great about that model is that because it is so simple, it's so easy to follow, and it helps you just streamline your thoughts. So even if you're like have a lot going on around you and you're super, super busy, answering what, so what, now what, I think can be is because it's so simple, it's almost like all you have to answer is like what is the most important part and what is it that you want to take with you. And I think that having a kind of guide to write down the answer to those questions also make sure that you're making the process of, like, sharing that learning with others around you a lot easier as well. So it's not like they have to trawl through like long reports and identify for themselves what they're going to take away from it. It's like they can look at the answers to those 3 questions and have a good understanding of how they can apply it to their own role. So yeah, I really like it as a tool.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Me too. Okay, I'm gonna just open the sort of space again for any anything that you're bringing today. You can change direction, but anything in the sort of okay, great. Jenny first. I think I saw your hand go up.
Hi, another Jenny. I'm from Devon, but I work on the periphery of all the work that's been going on. So like, feel free to ask any questions. I might also hand over to my team outside of this if anyone's interested. But yeah, because it's been fantastic work. but I can't speak to it too much, unfortunately, although it has been fantastic to sort of be involved in a small way in all of it. And thanks so much to Collaborate for everything you've done, because it's yeah, great to sort of follow and start sort of taking this sort of new pathway around it. My question really is, so this shouldn't be the case at all, but there's so much of a hierarchy around like what types of data and learning evaluation, whatever, you know, all those older terms, especially around, you know, let's bring up the word randomized control trials as well, you know, that when you're kind of working in partnership, particularly where it's with maybe more funding bodies or statutory organizations, it's I'm wondering how you kind of work with taking a new approach, but recognizing that there are views in the room that for whatever reason they're viewing this as maybe not as I don't know, as robust, you know, and again that's not helpful, but it sometimes it is the view, and I'm sort of aware that if people are coming from that perspective and they're holding positions of power, then it can just create a bit of a challenge, and it doesn't mean that we don't want to take an approach that is what they're espousing, but it just creates a bit of difficulty. So I'm just wondering how we negotiate that, and if you've got any thoughts.
Great question. I think we touched on this a bit last time. This is obviously it's a work in progress. If we've got any funders or commissioners in the room, it would be great to hear from you. We're quite pragmatic at Collaborate, as in, you know, we do believe that a learning approach can sit alongside a kind of more traditional approach, and I think we have to be pragmatic in the world that we're in. I'm reminded of a little piece of work that I did earlier this year, supporting Social Care Wales, who are bringing in a new kind of learning approach, strategy called Umline, which I believe means forward. They recognise that they were collecting lots of data on their work, a lot of which has to be reported to government because they're a social care regulator. But they didn't feel that they were understanding kind of what that data was really telling them about their work and about how to improve their work. So they're not going to stop collecting that data or passing it up to government, but they want to use that data in a different way. So they're setting up learning clusters internally along different kind of themes of their work. And they're going to use the data that they already collect, as well as their kind of own reflections on their work, to generate insights on their work and how to improve it. And I was thinking about it in relation to the previous question, because they're coming together as practitioners, using learning logs to kind of have peer learning conversations about what they're learning about and through their work. They're then kind of logging those insights. Each group is sort of nominating or has a kind of a co-lead, those co-leads are coming together with more senior folk to kind of make sense of those insights, and those insights are then kind of being fed up to a more senior level. And when they publish their next impact report, it won't just have the data, it will have much more insight about what is this data telling us. You know, I guess really simply kind of having this sort of mantra, which I heard someone else speak about recently, but kind of no data without commentary, without narrative. You know, that's what we should be aiming for, an absolute kind of minimum. So I think that there are ways of doing this kind of side by side. I'm just trying to think of the examples that you talk through, Emma, whether
Yeah,
relevant.
Oh,
Yeah, go on. Do you want to comment?
yeah, I was just going to add, Jenny, and maybe you said this because my internet cut out a bit when you were speaking, but it's also actually something we did in Devon with the commissioners who were setting up the new Devon Domestic Abuse Alliance. So they, yeah, obviously their commissioners also are really on board with learning, but the way that they've decided to kind of monitor that service is to not only like have the data that they need to report on, but to kind of have like a almost like a data interrogation framework that sits next to that data that asks the commissioners and the providers to come together and speak about what the data means and kind of writing that down and having that accompanying, just as Naomi said, to the actual numbers. And I think that that's been really helpful, not just in the fact of like, okay, we need to understand this data better, but to kind of be in a room together and listen to the different perspectives about what might be happening in the service. So it achieves two aims in that sense. Like the data that gets reported is accompanied by like a narrative and it helps tell the story, but it also is involving everyone that's, involved in the delivery of that service. Their perspectives are included in how well it's running. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Lewis, I don't know if you want to comment on RCTs.
I mean, I don't really want to. RCTs, I think there are certain contexts clearly where RCTs can work, but I would question the ability for control. There are lots of things, like for instance, it's the gold standard in medicine, but actually we've more and more understanding is coming out that actually the control that was used was not accurate. For instance, a lot of evidence that lots of these RCTs were done on men, and that women's biology means that actually the medicines don't even affect the same, but yet are what is in our NICE guidelines. So my thing with RCTs is that I think control, if you can control everything, great, but in most reality, I think it's almost impossible to control everything. And what that does is gives you a false sense of understanding change pathways. And so, yeah, if you think you can absolutely control everything, then I am then go ahead. But I think as that sort of diagram at the start with all those different things going on, yeah, you couldn't you would have to do so much work to find a control group where you were absolutely certain that everybody had exactly the same life experience, absolutely the same different things going on or not, or know that you could disclude some life experiences or not. I just think in reality it is very hard to do, and I'm yet to see a really convincing RCT within the social space that says that it is an approach. Yeah.
Thanks, Lewis. We're definitely straying into next week's data conversation. I think, and I want to bring Francis and Alice in because they've been patiently waiting to come in. So Francis, go ahead.
Thanks, everyone. No, it's a very enjoyable discussion. So hopefully this isn't a sort of dopey area of question, but just to go right back to the beginning where you were talking about the kind of mechanics and culture and skills, I was, I guess, kind of wondering how you approach that in terms of beginning to work within an organization and kind of recognizing what actually should we emphasize here. Is like, here is probably going to be like a mechanics thing broadly, and then maybe the other things, and then how consciously you sort of shift between them so that the three areas are kind of growing together. Yeah, I suppose I was thinking about that.
Yeah, nice question. Well, I guess, the starting point is to just try to understand what's already going on, what kind of in those three areas. So what's already in place that supports learning from a kind of structure point of view, who's got the skills. When I went into Social Care Wales to train these kind of facilitators who are going to be facilitating this learning clusters, we explored what types of practices are you already using that you can kind of apply in this context. Yes, you're already using appreciative inquiry. Great, you can run an appreciative inquiry kind of process within the learning cluster. So what's already there, and then what do you believe? Like trying to get to that understanding of how are people coming to this? Are they cynical? Do they believe that change is possible? Do they, do they feel they have agency? So, and that gives you a sense of where do you need to kind of put in the work. But I do think these things grow alongside each other. So you have to give people the spaces to practice their skills, and we learn through doing. So fundamentally, every kind of intervention in developing learning infrastructure is in itself an experiment, and you have to reflect on like, how's it working, and what are we like, what's working and what isn't. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. That's I think a bit like Jenny said earlier, it's kind of reassuring to hear somebody else say that sort of thing. No? Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, it's self-evident in a way, but I think it's definitely borne out in practice. And we should. One thing that we debate a lot in Collaborate is how people feel about the word learning. We could have a whole session on that, probably. A lot of people have had bad kind of, learning or educational experiences, and they don't react well to the idea that you're going to put them in a learning space. So sometimes it's about thinking about actually what's the language that we're using around this.
Yeah.
Alice, just squeeze you in.
Thank you. This has been really interesting. I work on the Office for Public Service Innovation at the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. Sorry, it's a mouthful. And we're looking to build a learning infrastructure which will include a sort of series of online sessions where we invite public service teams, voluntary organisations to sort of share their innovation work. So, and like share the learnings, I guess, with the network. And one of the things we've been thinking about is around that learning culture and creating a safe space. And so we're leaning towards not recording the sessions to sort of enable those discussions, but I didn't know if you had any experience of then how you share what was discussed with the wider audience or people who can't attend, but in a way that's sort of still valuable, and then how you sort of test that. So yeah.
Great question. If other people have got kind of suggestions around this, do you pop them in the chat? But Lewis, do you want to?
Yes, I think so. I think often learning is best done when it's experiential. And so I guess going back to the point I made at the start, it's not just about the acquisition of knowledge. So clearly those people who aren't able to attend, there's probably definitely some value to them of hearing what was discussed. But I basically think, can they really then I think sometimes we think about learning as being able to hear something, take it back into what you already know and see whether that changes it, or see whether it does something. So I'd be always trying to focus on how much of that can you do. So if people can't attend, like I almost think, how can can you do other kinds of discussions, or can they pair with people who were there so that they can get some, it wouldn't be necessarily the same, but get some of that back. And I think if you, it's about the conditions you have. If you think that if by recording it it's going to change how people are, and that by not recording it you'll get the best space, then I sort of agree with that. I think that's helpful. So it's then how can you find a way to connect those other people in so that they don't aren't lost, and peer approaches would probably be what I recommend, or other groups or things like that. I think I don't think it's about whether recording would it impact something, and if you think it would, then I would focus on how you can engage others and ensure that others are able to attend. At one point, we're running out of time here. One of the things we did on a project that Emma and I worked on, affectionately known as Dish, was we did a bit of, I haven't got time to explain the project, but we did a bit of work about thinking about like the sort of concentric circles of people, and that there was a real core group in the middle, and they needed to spend a lot of time together, but there were people in sort of different levels of engagement who needed a different kind of engagement. They didn't necessarily need to be in that central part, but they did need some engagement, but it looked differently. And what we did with them was really identify those sort of circles, those groups of people, and modify how they engage with them. So rather than trying to do one thing for everyone, we're actually, some people just can't always be engaged in the same way. doing a bit of that segmentation to understand how different people want to be engaged and can be involved in projects can be also useful for those who might not be able to attend everything or things like that.
Thanks, Lewis. Love the idea of learning buddies, and we might also use like a Miro board or something to kind of try and document an ongoing kind of learning process as well. We've run out of time. Thanks, folks, for being with us. Emma's just going to pop up a slide which has got a QR code where you can sign up to our newsletter if you are not already signed up. And if you would like a longer conversation with us, we are offering a kind of a follow-up diagnostic call, one-to-one, with a member of the team where we can just kind of hear more about the challenge that you're facing and talk that through with you. So do let Emma know if you would like a call. We love to hear from anyone about kind of how you're sort of building your learning infrastructure. Our next event in this series is on 20th of November, when we will be focusing on particularly the gathering of data, but all things data. Again, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.